Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan and around the region. I'm Chris Gorin. This week, tech CEOs and innovators of the technology behind Bitcoin, known as blockchain, are meeting in Taipei for one of the world's largest crypto events of the year. It's called the Asia Blockchain Summit, and this year they're focused on how the technology can work alongside AI and follow a specific set of principles known as plurality. We're joined today by an advocate of plurality, Glen Weyl. Glen leads research at Microsoft's Plural Technology Co-Laboratory and is one of the keynote speakers at the Asia Blockchain Summit. He is also the co-author, alongside Taiwan's former Digital Minister Audrey Tang and other collaborators, including maybe you, of their new book, Plurality, which explores the relationship between technology and democracy. Glen, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's my honor.
So let's first zoom out a little bit. How did you come to this concept of plurality?
Well, in 2018, I was introduced by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, to Audrey Tang. And we started working together on using an idea I developed in a previous book called Quadratic Voting for the Taiwanese presidential hackathon. And I became aware during that time of how much influence the book was having here in Taiwan. And Audrey and I started to work together more. We met in person. And I was just incredibly moved by the work she was doing here and how it was helping to transform the society. And we ended up working together on this book, which in turn used this name plurality that had initially showed up in Audrey's job description back in 2016. And that became sort of the symbol, the way of describing the work that she'd done, the philosophy lying underneath it.
You and your co-author, Audrey Tang, have chosen a very clever name for the Chinese version of the book. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the book is named Digital Shui Plurality in English, and it's got a Chinese name as well. And it uses these two characters, shui. Shui means both digital and plural at the same time, because in traditional Mandarin, shui is both a way of saying digital, but it's also a way of saying that whatever word comes after it is turned into a plural. So Audrey was both digital minister and kind of many ministers at the same time, or minister of pluralism. And the book is actually filled with all these kind of multiple meanings. There's also a symbol that you can see on the book down here, which is these two intersecting squares. This is a universal coded character, a Unicode character, and so it can be written on any computer. And it means this notion of intersection, of different people from different societies finding a way to productively work together. So we put a lot of effort, not just into the words or ideas, but the way in which we meld these different cultures, how we bring together the Western and Eastern perspectives, and the way that we symbolize that in ways that respect and yet transcend each of the cultures visually as well as, in words.
And at the beginning of the book, you set up a kind of conflict between democracy and technology, but you say that it also, the two things are actually allies in a certain way. So tell us where you see conflicts and how they can actually work together.
Well, I think things in Taiwan are quite different than what they are in the West. And I think that's part of the synergy of this book is, I grew up in Silicon Valley. I very much come from the heart of the tech industry in the US. And Audrey grew up here. And so we bring these two different perspectives. So in the US, it very much feels like democracy and technology are really almost at war with each other. Technology is eroding the foundations of democracies. It's creating polarization. It's creating misinformation. And you see the really decay in Europe and the US of democracy in the face of technology. And at the same time, technologists feel under attack from democracies. They feel they get complaints and regulations and much less investment. There's actually a big decline in investment in technology development by governments. So they feel this under assault from democracy at the same time. So these are at loggerheads with each other. In Taiwan, it's very different. And it's very clear why that's happening, because Taiwan is a place where Taiwan has a greater share of its economy coming from the digital economy than anywhere else in the world. So you can't have a livelihood here without having really big focus on technology. At the same time, Taiwan's existence, Taiwan's identity is all about being a democracy. That, it wouldn't continue to exist if Taiwan didn't have that identity. So democracy and technology, you can't choose between them here. You're either choosing your life as an island or your livelihood if you have to choose between technology and democracy. So they've had to make them work together. And they've done that incredibly well. It's become the world's leading example of digital democracy. So I think the book is really about saying that there's an alternative to this conflict that exists in the West that comes from this example here in Taiwan.
So tell us a little bit more about the work that you and Audrey Tang have done together in Taiwan on some of these plurality issues.
Yeah. So some of the things that Audrey has, together with the GovZero and us, helped develop are this idea of V-Taiwan, which is a system that's kind of like social media, X, but that rather than kind of hiding the divisions that exist within society and then harnessing them to sell people advertisements by sort of exacerbating the divisions, instead it shows people what the divisions are and then highlights the things that bring people together and actually uses those as a basis for legislation. And in fact, I think there have been about 20 laws passed in Taiwan on the basis of these conversations through V-Taiwan. That idea has been very influential to my work. And then, they've used things that have come out of my work in conjunction with those for presidential hackathon and other things.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the presidential hackathon that you mentioned. I mean, what were you seeing there that sort of inspired you to develop this idea more?
Well, so the presidential hackathon was this attempt to bring civil innovation into the government by bringing attention to the most important innovations that were developed by people in the civil sector at a local level, and then raising them to the national profile, turning them into national digital public infrastructure. And they needed a way to invite citizens to participate in selecting what those were, which ones were the best, which ones deserved that attention. And they decided to use this technique that I developed called Quadratic Voting to help do that. I thought it was, very well suited to that circumstance because the idea of quadratic voting was to allow people to participate in circumstances where you really want to show how important things are to you, not just, to have voting in a simplistic way, but to really give a sense of your priorities. And so I thought it was a great fit.
Okay, well, let's zoom in a little bit and talk about a few of the concrete ways in which plurality can be put into practice. Now, you've already mentioned several times about this quadratic voting system that you've come up with. Tell us, what is quadratic voting?
So I think quadratic voting is like an example of a broader set of approaches to voting, which try to do what is the core idea of plurality, which is allow more diversity and more cooperation at the same time. So in a standard voting rule, like they use to elect the president here, a big problem is that you might want to vote for a third or fourth or fifth party, but you're afraid that that will end up being a spoiler. And if you prefer one of the top two candidates, that if you vote for someone who you really like, that you won't be able to make a decision on the main thing. And that was actually an issue in the most recent Taiwanese presidential election because there were three parties, and do you vote for one of the leading two, the KMT or the DPP, or do you vote for the TPP, which some people were more excited about, et cetera. And the idea is that there are many approaches that you could take to make that less of an issue, to allow people to express more fully what they want. So one example is approval voting. Approval voting just says you can vote for as many candidates as you want. So you could vote for both the DPP and the TPP, or both the KMT and the TPP. But quadratic voting takes it one level deeper.
So if I'm just your everyday voter and I go into the voting booth or the voting website, as it were, what am I going to see in a quadratic voting ballot?
So you're going to see up at the top of the screen, you've got like 100 credits, and you put more on or against one candidate. And as you do, it increments up the votes and it draws down your credits. But the more you put on a candidate or against a candidate, the more expensive it is out of your budget to get more. So the first vote costs 1, the second vote costs additional 3, the third vote costs 5, et cetera. Which means that if you put a few credits, you get more influence per credit than if you put a lot on one thing. In fact, there's a game called Civilization 6, which is the best-selling strategy game of all time, and this uses this dynamic. So in Civilization 6, you've got like credits at the top, and then you vote on these diplomatic things where you're negotiating with other countries, and it has exactly this structure.
This type of voting system is a little bit more complicated than just an up or down vote.
Yeah.
Is there any risk that a voter might be intimidated by this and they might just choose to stay out of an election altogether? I mean, does having this slightly more complicated system, even though it may be better at showing preferences among people, might it reduce voter turnout?
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting question. It's a question that happens with pretty much all advanced technology. So anytime you try to bring in computers, cell phones, word processing, there's going to be some people who find it challenging to interact with this new modality, even though it opens them up to a new world, right? And I think that Taiwan has been a world leader in terms of really connecting young people, connecting the government to make sure that everyone in society has understanding and access to that technology, universal broadband, and really thinking of cell phones as a human right that everyone has. So absolutely, if you're going to experiment with these things, it's critical that you kind of build them into the social fabric and you do it in a gradual way that invites everyone into participation. But on the other hand, it really, I think, opens up the possibilities for people. And one great thing about quadratic voting is you can do things that are very simple in it. You can just put all your votes on one candidate and whatever, And I think you'd want functionality so that maybe that's how it initially starts. And it's easy for people, if they just want to do the simple thing, they can just do that. That's what in technology we call backwards compatibility. You want to offer people new opportunities, but you also want to make it easy for them, if they just want to do what they're used to do that as well.
All right, last question, 10, 20 years from now, in your sort of ideal world, what does the world look like at that time?
So my dream is that people come to expect their democracies to advance just as quickly as their devices, that Taiwan is a symbol throughout the world of the future of democracy, and that it's in people's hearts because of that, that people, conservative people from all different parts of society, very religious people, come to have unpredictable heroes, like Audrey, who's the first non-binary minister of a major country. And that people see a new future for technology that is not about an AI doing everything for you or blockchains wiping away governments and communities, but instead seeing technology as a way to connect to people across difference, to work together towards a better future, and to build relationships.
Well, Glenn, it was a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Really appreciate having your insights.
It's an honor to be with you.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus News, check us out on social media. We'll see you next time.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
we make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.